We are at it again. We are trying to win the big prizes over at the FFPC, and we are joined by a guest on today's show. But you are, as always, ready for myself, Colin Kelly. I'm joined by Shawn Siegele, and we're joined here by David Philippi as well. And we are excited to be drafting from the 5th spot in the FFPC $125 contest. Shawn, we say this every time. We came second in this contest a couple of years ago with Blair Andrews. We did draft recently with Blair. We're going to have another team here. We want to make sure that we win it this year. So we are going to jump in here with David. How are you, Shawn, as we get ready to kick off this draft?
Good, good. And I'm excited that we have David with us. He and I have been chatting a little bit about some work he may do for the site. And so that is always fun. I haven't done the best job of necessarily releasing these names, but I did pick 2 winners of the review contest, and those were Chandler and the Achievers. I'm going to be drafting Fantasy Pros leagues with them over the next week. So that's very exciting. Have a chance to win the $1 million there. There's going to be a little bit of overlay in that tournament probably, and so I encourage everybody to jump in if you want a little bit easier path to the $1 million than you might have been expecting. Now, you're going to draft an awfully good team either way. So make sure you go out and have fun and do that. But we're going to be doing those teams. But the response was so overwhelming, and I appreciated the reviews so much that I wanted to include additional people. So I drew 3 additional names, one of which was David. And so he's going to draft with us today in the Best Ball Tournament, $125 entry. Colin, what is the grand prize today here?
200,000 is what we are aiming for, Shawn. We are going to try and settle for that, so we'll see how we get on. But David, I believe as well, also top 100 finish over in the BBMs over at Underdog. So we have somebody here who's going to help us along to push us over that line. How are you feeling? You mentioned a moment ago a little bit nervous, but I said you're drafting with Shawn Siegele, so don't be nervous. But David is worried that Shawn will let the clock run out here on these draft picks.
Yeah. Well, so I haven't been in any of the FFPC best balls this summer. So that's kind of what I'm looking at right now is the difference, because Underdog ADP is so drilled into my head. And seeing something like Joe Mixon at 30, it takes a minute to gather yourself after that. Yeah.
The advantage of that, though, maybe, Shawn, for us in this draft, I know we've been drafting at Underdog as well, but it does get you in that mindset of where the differences in value could be on certain players and how ADP is different on certain sites. I know there's different scoring settings, but that will be interesting. But let's jump into the draft board. We will reveal a spoiler. We did have the 5th pick. We already made that 5th pick. That was Tyreek Hill. The draft starting off Justin Jefferson, Travis Kelce, Jamar Chase, Christian McCaffrey. We had talked a little bit before the draft about it being between Hill and McCaffrey and hoping that one of them makes it to us. Obviously, we would previously have had Cooper Kupp in that kind of range. For people who did hear the draft that we did along with Blair Andrews, we did take Garrett Wilson over Cooper Kupp. Maybe a controversial
before he was
decision.
Hurt.
Yeah, before
he was re-injured.
Yeah, so it was maybe a controversial decision at the time, but may have worked out. So we are 2 picks away, but since we selected Eckler, goes off the board, Robinson, Diggs, Lamb, Chubb, Brown, St. Brown, Garrett Wilson, Devontae Adams, Cooper Kupp, Barkley, Pollard, Henry. So there's a balance here. Quite a run there of I was wondering what we were going to do if Mark Andrews got this. Mark Andrews does go off the board. So we are up here. We're going to talk to you first, Dave. Have you any preferences of potential picks here at this spot?
Well, I'm fine with Waddle too. I know Shawn loves taking him. I don't know if I've heard you guys do both of them together, but I do it here and there, and I would also be fine with Devontae Smith if you're interested in taking the chance on Hurts coming back. If you don't want to play Hurts at all, I would probably skip Devontae.
How are you feeling, Shawn? We haven't done a Hill Waddle team because we haven't drafted really in a position to get Hill in recent drafts. How are you feeling about that?
Well, I think I would probably go away from him with Hill.
Olave.
So we'll go ahead and take Devontae Smith. Look and see if we get Hurts to come back around. His ADP over the last couple of days has been there at the 302. A little bit is that Devontae Smith goes to the 212. So Hurts is being pulled up by certainly a number of drafters are going to put them together. David, my question for you would be, how close is Chris Olave for you there? And if we wrap back around and both Hurts and say a T. Higgins, who is in this range by ADP, if those guys are both there, is it a lock to take Devontae Smith, or do you also consider Higgins? I mean, is it a lock to take Jalen Hurts, or do you also take
I guess
Higgins?
I say that assuming the only way Hurts is there is that Higgins is gone. You know, they're not both there. So I like both. I mean, I like both of them there. Yeah, I can't imagine having the choice.
Just for reference, over the past kind of 3 or 4 days, Hurts has been kind of one of the last 4 to 5 picks off that second round. Devontae Smith, though, usually now been pulled up into the mid-second round, so it will be a little, and Hurts does go. So I thought that might have been a little bit tough. Sean asked about Olave. I think it is interesting in that point. Sean, with it as well, we have done quite a few of the Waddle and Tua teams. What would be your thoughts there? Like, you know, we obviously pass on Waddle. I think if it's 1v1 and we don't have Hill, we go Waddle over Smith. But in a format like this, we've talked about maybe not needing to super stack teams as much, but with a team like the Dolphins, and we think it will be pretty concentrated, are you completely out on the option there of going Hill, Waddle, and trying to get Tua later on?
Not completely out, but I do think we give ourselves a little bit more of that option for in week 17 for Tyreek Hill to be the guy who puts up the huge numbers. We obviously have a lot of Waddle teams. And so, I mean, either way there, if we get teams into the finals, I guess I'm almost thinking about like having multiple teams in the finals, which, you know, that's going to be
with himself in the finals.
That's going to be a challenge. But I like to have that sort of optionality there. I also really like Devontae Smith as a guy in terms of single week upside, just being absolutely massive. One of the things here by letting Jalen Waddle slide, and certainly it would be less of an issue if we had taken both, but just it's always kind of fun to be in that spot where coming back in the even number round, you are going to have the pick before the other team with a Dolphins receiver has the pick. And so we'll be able to make that move to grab Tua if it makes sense at that point. I like to be in that position, and when we find ourselves there, usually it's because we have Waddle. Today it's because we have Hill.
Yeah, and I think the one thing I would say on that is I find sometimes like we're looking at the sprint and the finals, and we think that the Dolphins are going to be an explosive team, put up lots of points, and it could be a case that, you know, week 15 you need Waddle and Tua, and weeks 16 you need Hill and Tua. That's one of the other ways that I would potentially look at it there. Sean mentioned T. Higgins. I would love if Higgins would make it back to us here. He is going in that mid-second round as wide receiver 13, just after Devontae Smith in recent days. So I'm not confident. And Sean, correct me if I'm wrong, I've been really good over these last few drafts at guessing when we are getting players and when we are not. It's been pretty telepathic, I think, at this point. But we are 2 picks away. There is a possibility. Other players that will be of interest, Sean, TJ Hawkinson has been the one we go back and forth on. We drafted with Blair. His ear infection seems to have cleared up after he gets that big contract.
It does seem to have cleared up.
But he may be available here as well, so we will have some options, which makes it interesting.
Colm, I was going to make a point of supporting if you wanted to take Hawkinson in this draft and thinking about, you know, how I can contribute anything. So I'm if Higgins doesn't make it,
I'm interested to see how Sean's going to filibuster his way out of this one.
Yeah, it sounds like I'm outvoted.
He really needs him to just go here, you know.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he's really hoping for now.
Yeah, you have to.
There he
does.
He does
go. Oh my goodness.
Pick your own guy and then say, "Oh, I misclicked. I apologize so much."
Sean's also drafting in the team in the 4 spot just to make sure I don't get Hawkinson.
So Hawkinson does go. Higgins does make it back. I think that is pretty exciting. I'll actually have a couple of teams here with both Smith and Higgins. David, you mentioned drafting a decent number of teams, obviously, in that underdog tournament to try and get in the top 100 again, to take the next step, maybe top 25. Maybe, you know, you will be the 2023 underdog champion. I assume when you're looking at this and you've drafted all those teams where Higgins, you know, goes off the board 210, 211, that you feel like 305 is pretty much a slam dunk.
Yeah, I mean, and he was on that team. Higgins was on that Best Ball Mania finals team, and I was ready to see what he could do for me. So, maybe week 17 this year.
We'll see what happens. We love ourselves a bit of T. Higgins, but a wide receiver start with Hill, Smith, and Higgins would have been a good conversation if Hockenson had went, but I am never against getting some T. Higgins on the team. Another thing we're going to do throughout today's show is answer some listener questions. People are obviously drafting at the moment. There's a lot of questions coming in about who we should be. They're looking for their home leagues to draft and so on. So lots of questions to come up throughout today's draft as well. But Sean, you mentioned the contest you had, and I do want to mention just a shout out to everyone who left a written review. The reviews were so positive towards both RotoViz Overtime and Stealing Bananas, and I thank you to everyone who took the time to leave them. It means a lot to myself, Sean, and Ben. We're very appreciative of all that. So I'm looking forward now to seeing Sean's teams as he drafts with the two main winners, but we're lucky today to be drafting along with Dave as well. So we'll hopefully have some success with these teams to talk about throughout this season. TJ Hockenson did go. Then we see Darren Waller go a couple of picks later with Keenan Allen and Calvin Ridley. Ramondre Stevenson goes off the board. How much are we going to push this into a zero RB roster? The 4th, 5th, 6th round have some nice options here, potentially at running back. But the thing that's interesting, Sean was mentioning kind of the advantage of being in the middle of the draft. Kind of now will be in a little bit of competition for Tua with the drafter who's one spot before us in 4, but we'll have that advantage coming back around. Now, obviously, that's going to be a long time away, but one of the things of being in the middle of the round is sometimes you do get those fallers, like in this particular draft of T. Higgins. We almost got Hockenson falling to us. That is one of the advantages. Who would you like to see potentially slide their way through to us here in the 4th round, Dave? Any preferences of players that you're looking at here?
I mean, Brees is probably the favorite for me.
Yeah. His ADP, Sean's interesting. It's not dropping as much in this contest as it has in the season-long format.
Yeah, it's been a little bit crazy. Ben and I drafted him at about 404 in our main event yesterday. I was chatting a little bit with JJ. I had a chance to go on the late round perspective show. That was a lot of fun. I shared the draft board that Ben and I had, as JJ had shared a couple with me. And as I was looking at the two, I was like, there's a lot of overlap on these players. But in JJ's draft, he actually got a couple of running backs a full round later. Took Breece Hall in the middle of the 5th, which, I mean, is Breece not like the fastest running back in the NFL right now? It's like, how is Breece Hall going in the 5th round?
Is he suspended? No? What's going on here? It's like,
I mean, he's at 409, and that would be the perfect guy coming back. So I'm really excited, Dave, to hear that you are also on board with that. Another question would be, I was going to say this is the Joe Burrow spot as well, but I feel like he did just go. Oh, he goes at 309. So we do have to deal with the fact that you're going to have some wild card picks in these drafts as well. We have Burrow go at the 310, I should say, to a drafter who started Nick Chubb, Cooper Kupp. And so neither the Chase nor the Higgins drafter is going to get him here. That makes me even more excited for Hall. Another name of a player who could fall, Travis Etienne. Dave, what's your thought there between those two guys? I mean, in a perfect world, we could probably get them both, but Etienne right now, an ADP in the last 2 or 3 days of 402. So it will be quite a fall if he gets to us at 408.
Yeah, I mean, I like Breece a lot more. And that doesn't mean I take him earlier. But I just see the situation in Jacksonville as much more potentially capped for Etienne than for Breece. And I have way more Tank Bigsby than I think you do, because I just think that there's it's a funner way to play it for me. And now he's gone, so that debate is not going to happen.
That's that. You know, Sean was praying that Hawkinson wouldn't make him too. So you were kind of doing the same there with ETN.
Yeah, well, we've got 45 seconds to see if. Okay.
So we are going to have a decision to make here. So and it feels like it's going to be a pretty straightforward decision. Sean, anyone else here for you at this pick outside of your boy, Breece Hall?
No.
Even your worrying exposures to Breece Hall, nothing stopping this pick?
No, because the flip side of that is that if you are right, you are going to look at this in 6 weeks and feel like you are in competition everywhere for all the tournaments. And so, no, I'm good with Breece here. David, you're also 100% in Breece Hall this pick?
Oh, yeah.
So we click him there. Now I think the question is, how do we play round 5 and what do we want to do at tight end? The tight ends, again, in the last couple of days, George Kittle, 411, Dallas Goedert, 503, Kyle Pitts, 507. Connor O'Driscoll, who won 2 years ago and then placed 2 more teams in the finals last year. So that's kind of what we're looking to do this year, place a couple teams into the finals, has written a great series on how to attack and win this format. Obviously, elite tight end is a big part of that. David, as we look here, do you think that this is an automatic tight end pick to get that elite tight end to go with a very nice 3 wide receiver and 1 running back start? Do you have a different player who we should also consider? If we're looking at the tight ends, do you have a preference between those 3 high-profile players?
Well, as far as going outside of the tight end position, I like the quarterback that you have in the queue. And to me, then that would push it to not having to think about quarterback till, even potentially just taking one other quarterback, waiting till later. And then there's more of some of those middle range tight ends that are worth thinking about. But I also really do like to take Kittle and Goddard. I don't think I could take Pitts this early, but if you took, I think it feels really early for Pitts for me.
Sean's trying to make it up for me because we didn't get Pitts in the last draft, I think was what we were leaning towards. I think that we will have an option potentially for 2 of those guys I'm hoping for. We do have the team in 2 who drafted Kelsey, we have the team in 4 who drafted Hawkinson. Now, they may double down on the tight ends, but I see at least 2 of these 3 guys hopefully making it into that conversation. The quarterback, this is the advantage when you are not streaming, Sean. We did talk about potentially streaming this particular draft, but we had Dave and Curtis streaming an FFPC main event over on the Road of his YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed over there already, please head on over and do so. But that gives the advantage of being able to name these players and not worry about getting sniped. It's always interesting when you still get sniped, even when nobody's listening. But that's just.
Although I wanted to say, your team name of OT, there's got to be at least 5 people in this draft room who knows who you are.
There's also the reason for that is when I signed up for this draft, I put in OT, and then Sean, we forgot to change the team name. I think that's what happened there. We do try.
I know. Well, if we had had a little more time, we would have gotten Dave's input and a good creative team name that would have helped us. We'll still change it to something fun so we can track this one easily throughout the season.
I was going to mention a very good point, Sean. We should not have OT as our team name.
Yeah. So I was going to say we'll blame that one on call up, but
we could just put the link to the rankings as our team name.
Right. So George Kittle does go. He is not 100%. And so that has been the thing that has concerned me a little bit there. Dave, where are you on Dallas Goedert, both overall and on a team where we have Devontae Smith, and we obviously are not going to have the quarterback? One of the elements for me here is that it does seem like if these guys hit in the way that we need, down the stretch to win the tournament, if you have the right guy, you can certainly still win. And yet the teams that also have a Jalen Hurts are perhaps going to have a leg up. Now, it is a little bit difficult to get all 3 of those guys, but certainly if you do it, at the 2-3 turn and then early in 5 here, which is one of the reasons I think that Goddard has an ADP that is somewhat optimistic there at the 503. So some teams are obviously doing that. Does that give you any pause when we think about the pick here at 505?
No, and I mean, I'm an Eagles fan, so it's not hard to sell me on. And Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown and Goddard were also all on that finals team. So I have no problem with stacking heavily. I think also, there he goes. I would just finish the thought, drafting more in a half PPR site and then coming over here to 1.5, I think does give him a boost, like relative to Kittle. So I think the gap that's between Kittle and Goddard on Underdog is more or less justified. I hear, I think they do belong pretty much in the same spot.
So we are up on the clock, Sean. I'm just going to mention here, obviously Jonathan Taylor is going to miss those opening weeks of the season. Is there a point here where he becomes interesting for you?
No.
Okay, fair enough. I just like to ask the questions. So we are it seems like we're not going for Kyle Pitts. The quarterback was Justin Fields, but there is some wide receiver options here that could be of interest as well, and the likes of Drake London and Deontay Johnson. Where are we leaning here? Let Dave go first. Let Sean go second.
Well, I just want to say that the other player for me would be Kenneth Walker. And so, David, between these two guys, Walker and Fields, you pretty locked into Fields?
It's Fields easily. There's a Charbonnet later. There's no replacing the Fields, I don't think.
So Fields is the QB that I have in a variety of places as your real target in the first 5 rounds if you're going to select an elite QB. Now, Colin and I have mostly not been going after the elite guy because I would say there are ways to replace the QB production, whereas, the flip side of the thing with Kenneth Walker is that, Charbonnet is like a far, far, far inferior talent. Now, from a scoring perspective, that might not matter because of high value touches. And so from that perspective, that's one of the reasons why Charbonnet makes the 0 RB candidates countdown.
Yeah.
Despite, again, some questions about his overall talent level. But especially since we've been not necessarily getting a lot of teams with the elite QB, I really love the start today where we have Fields. Certainly if we end up coming back and taking Tua, then this could very easily be a 2 QB build. And that gives us some additional flexibility late. In this particular format, we're going to have some receivers who come around in 6, 7, 8. We do have the 3 guys to start. It's going to be more or less the tight end position that ends up being an interesting kind of cobbled together spot for us. Now, one of the things that the Roster Construction Explorer is very clear about for tight ends in this format is something that will work. And so as long as we have those late targets, and we do, that'll be a great way to complement the start for this team. So, this is perfect. We get those 3 wide receivers. We get Breece Hall. We get Justin Fields. This is the all-star team that we set out to draft.
Yeah, it's a really nice start. And you mentioned, Sean, about the elite quarterbacks, and we haven't done it a lot, but it is something in previous years that we focused on quite a bit. And with Fields, for me, he is the last person in that tier, but we talked about this in some of the Superflex drafts. Before he goes here, we have Herbert in the middle of the 4th, and we have Jackson at the start of the 4th. And for me, I would take Fields over both of those guys, and it's closer with Jackson, but then Lawrence goes 2 picks later than Fields does. And the other thing I like about Fields is you're able to open up to potential options towards the latter parts of the draft. So you mentioned tight end as well. It may open you up to a Cole Kmet pick, for example. So there is some interesting options to go with Fields at lesser cost than the quarterbacks that do go before him. So I think that makes.
Well, I'm just watching to see as Walker goes up. And there goes Pitts. Love Stars was just dying. For I was like, is there a chance? Does it ever go that far?
I don't think so. I often say to Sean, if we were drafting solo, who would you have picked? That one there for me I would have gone Pitts at that point. I just think that the value in tight end premium for him at that particular spot is immense. But I also like the Fields pick quite a bit, so it's one of those where happy with the balance. Sean, the question I wanted to ask you too, as we wait to tick along 2 hours, I mentioned Jonathan Taylor. You said no. Cooper Kupp in this draft went at the 203. People are drafting over the weekend, and ADP.
I didn't even realize he went that late.
Yeah. So, what, Sean, for you would be the point that you're drafting Cooper Kupp? Obviously, he's in the 104, 105 range conversation. We passed him for Garrett Wilson. That was for me quite a difficult choice before the new injury news came out. But we love Wilson. We had Blair on. We had to get it done. Where is the point where you think you would still be taking Kupp with the current news? And there's a fear that even if he gets back on the field, that this could reoccur again.
Yeah, I think that's about the right spot. I would probably still take him ahead of Davante Adams, but Davante Adams, the number 1 player in the range of outcomes tool.
Yeah.
That's a situation agnostic tool, and yet it does underline just how unbelievable Davante Adams have been. Both Kupp and Adams have a recent season where they average 25.7 points per game. You don't get that from wide receivers. And so for so many other receivers to go ahead of them, for guys like Stephon Diggs to go significantly ahead, I think doesn't make a lot of sense. But I do like that spot for Kupp because you now have some very real concerns. And we're talking about the 1-2 turn. There are other elite players here. So that's where I would take him. And that's frustrating because I did have him as being basically, I had him ahead of Tyreek Hill, who we took at the 105. And so it's just too bad that this injury has been lingering.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate. It feels to me like you mentioned Adams. I'm kind of right in that Waddle Smith, kind of tier there. So anywhere in the, I'm willing to take those guys anywhere in the early second. So I think it's a fair spot. Heartbreak for me, Sean. That was the player I was going to pitch, was Javonte Williams. He goes off the board 2 picks before us. We're into a similar situation potentially here. Jerry Jeudy may be a target. He's obviously with the injury. The next round, I think, is going to give us a few options with the likes of Dotson, Smith and Jigba, potentially even Swift. But are we willing to go with Jeudy here, or do we go with one of the other guys above that?
Who do you like here, David? These guys are going in the last couple of days just right at this spot. Jeudy probably more likely to fall. But even if you fell, we might prefer JSN. How are you liking to play this?
Judy's my last favorite player in the queue.
Okay.
Yeah, the least favorite, yeah.
Who's your first favorite?
Anyone but Jeudy. I like the idea of getting, 2 Eagles. And this is kind of the last chance to really potentially hit big there. So
I think we can get Swift, though, potentially at the next pick. I don't want to curse that next pick, but...
Do you have a preference between Dotson and JSN?
Well, it looks like Dotson goes earlier, so we could maybe get him and then JSN.
Yeah, so that'll give us 2 potential picks on the way back. So in terms of getting a sense of what you were looking at there, we take Dotson. I don't believe he would have come back. I do think that both JSN and DeAndre Swift, who is the Eagle that you're talking about, and someone who would give us a second really high upside running back. Those are the 2 players that we're sort of looking at. I think that they will both come back to us. If they do, David, do you have a strong choice between the 2?
He wants all the Eagles, Sean. He's told you this multiple times.
They're like they're like the 2 guys I like to draft the most. I think only Gainwell do I draft more than Swift, and JSN's at the top. So, but because we've loaded up on the receivers to start and we're just with the 1 running back, and I tend to be comfortable not having a ton of running backs. If we have Swift, I'm even more comfortable, with the number of running backs maybe being lower, especially because we're going to need to prioritize tight end volume. So I would probably lean Swift.
And just to look ahead as well, I mentioned, the likes of Komet or Sam Laporta, for example, they're going to be in round 10, 11 range in terms of potential tight end options. So, between now 7, 8, and 9 is the kind of range where we probably realistically want to have 1 more running back and 2 more wide receivers potentially before that. But which order we do them, and we'll see if both of them are there to make that conversation. Sean, obviously, Swift got number 1 on that 0 RB countdown list last week at this point in time, but I think it could be interesting between JSN and Swift, just for the upside at wide receiver that this could give you. So in this format, you know, there is the 2 flex positions, but that means that there could be 4 starting wide receivers potentially to the 2 running backs. But the running back that we would be looking at in this range would certainly be DeAndre Swift if we do go in that direction. How are you feeling, Sean, so far through this draft? I think we're having a pretty clear run here. I know there's a couple of players we said we missed out on, but outside of those couple of guys, it's been smooth sailing so far.
Yeah, I absolutely love this team. We have David here is a good luck charm for us. We're just through 6 rounds, but I'm already willing to say, you know, into the finals. We got to figure out how we win the finals now. No, but this has been a lot of fun, and I do think that getting one of the 2 players we're discussing here would be perfect. When we think about how we might put this team together a little bit later for that final week, we have a Rashad Bateman who would fit opposite Hill. We have some kind of stealth Chiefs receivers that would fit opposite T. Higgins. The Steelers guys are obviously gone opposite Jahan Dotson. We don't have to have every single player work in there, but the sort of later round options to pair with our early round guys, I really enjoy that part of it also. Yeah, so a lot is going to depend on the tight ends, but I'm pretty excited to see who we have here. I agree with the point about DeAndre Swift giving us flexibility. I would also point out here that one of the interesting things that you will find if you really dive deep into the roster construction explorers, and is in some ways a little bit counterintuitive because Underdog is the half PPR format, FFPC, the full PPR format, but a little bit more of a running back heavy squad does have better results here. And again, the reason that we think that is the case, you have 2 running back, 2 wide receiver, 2 flex. You can get 4 running backs into the lineup. You can go as few as 2 wide receivers. That's a big difference from Underdog, where you can only get 3 at most at running back into the lineup, and you have to have at least 3 receivers. We got a little bit of a gut punch sound there from my co-hosts because as I was talking, JSN does go off the board.
He did, and I was actually going to make the pitch if we did take Swift that I thought that JSN had a slim chance of making it back to us in the 8th round. His ADP is in the 804 at the moment, so let's hope we get one more pick here that Swift will make it to us. I think I'm comfortable with the Swift pick, Sean, if he makes it. Is there another player here that can kind of challenge him in this range? Some of the other players in the queue, Brian Robinson, Mike Evans, Quentin Johnson, Treylon Burks, Bateman, feel like they may be the players in conversation in the next round.
Really everybody else that I put in there was for the next round. So it's very much a case where we want this to be it's very much the case that we want this to be Swift.
The countdown is on. 28 seconds left to go. After this, we will jump into another listener submitted question, and
there we go.
Miles Sanders. I seen the green flash up for the running back position, and I thought, oh no. Sean uses no time on the clock to get that pick in. I think that's the quickest, Sean, we may have ever made a pick while recording a draft. But we get Swift, we get our second Eagle in there. So smiles all around here from all 3 of us to get that second running back and for it to be DeAndre Swift along with Breece Hall with what we've done so far. I am very, very happy with that. Jumping in, Sean, to a listener question. And there was a part of this question was about Cooper Kupp, and he had projected him to fall to the 203 in his draft. This comes in from Matt. He was asking, though, it's a super flex draft that he's also questioning. He says, how does the super flex format and scoring impact your draft plan, Sean, and the site's overall strategy for attacking redraft and home leagues this year? Obviously, Sean did an article last year talking about home league drafts. He said his plan for the last month or so is to hope to land Chase and Kupp, but obviously now Kupp has picked up that injury to start and follow that up with quarterback and running back in the 2-3, depending on whether the 14 spot in this particular 14-team league takes a quarterback at the 1-2 turn, who he was projecting to be Watson. He's tempted to take the best running back available in the 3rd and then the best quarterback available in the 4th. And he said that the quarterback would likely be Carr, Pickett, or Purdy. The alternative to that would be to start running back wide receiver at the 1-2 turn and then grab quarterback wide receiver at the 3-4. The wide receiver would be T. Higgins, Olave, Metcalf, Devontae Smith. He says, thank you for all the great work you do. His draft is this Tuesday. Would appreciate any feedback that we may have for him. His plan is to use the redraft tiers on the site as his main reference. There's a lot of parts in that question, Sean. I guess the main part that I would feed it into you is when you go into a draft, one of the things that we tend to very rarely actually have is exact player targets at exact picks. I'll let you answer the question, obviously, but how do you feel about the targets, I guess, and how this may play out for him?
Yeah, so you have kind of a mix of different incentives and trade-offs that are going to come into play here. The number one thing that we see is that in the home leagues, our wide receiver targets in the middle tiers tend to really fall. And so in high stakes, you've got to prioritize those guys and you've got to put a bunch of them onto your roster. If you wait on them, you're going to get hit by the wide receiver avalanche. In home leagues, that's less the case. And so you can prioritize QB and running back more in those. When we're thinking about Superflex, the other big consideration is how much is the QB scoring neutralized in your specific league? Because if the QB scoring is knocked down in order to make it a true Superflex as opposed to a 2 QB kind of default type of situation, then I really like getting those star running backs, the star wide receivers, because you can go after the lower QBs. You can go after guys like a Desmond Ridder, Kenny Pickett, obviously a Sam Howell. And even if you miss, you're going to have the elite running back, the elite wide receiver that you can put into that Superflex. And in many leagues, the scoring is actually similar enough that that's a fine play. And what that also does is give you the flexibility to actually have better running backs and better wide receivers if your kind of sleeper QB does hit. So it creates a super team for you. So the combination of the super team and the flexibility, really makes you want to go with something of an anchor QB and then wait on it. But again, the flip side of that is that in home leagues, and especially if the QB scoring is high, so it's almost a 2 QB format, then you want to make sure.
This particular league is a 6-point pass and touchdown league. Does that affect it much between 6 and 4 for you for points per touchdown?
It does. And so in that type of format, we want to make sure that we're prioritizing these elite passers. And sometimes, especially in 2023, with the ADP that's out there, people will forget that 6-point scoring is going to make guys like a Justin Herbert. I think it makes someone like a Trevor Lawrence really interesting. And then as you move down through the tiers, though, it makes players like a Geno Smith, like a Jared Goff. I mean, those guys are very potentially exciting. But also it makes someone like a Kenny Pickett a real target. I mean, Pickett could go off and be this year's Trevor Lawrence in terms of making the jump. When you have a Pickens and you have a Deontay Johnson, you have a Pat Freiermuth. So all of those different elements, I think, are the things that you want to consider as you get ready for your Superflex draft.
Thanks to Matt for sending that question. I probably should have mentioned the 6 points at the start, but yeah, it's always interesting to get the variety of leagues now that are expanding into even home leagues, whether it's dynasty or redraft. I often credit, Scott Fish with the expansion of Superflex in terms of the format and popularizing it with the Scott Fish Bowl. But yeah, awesome to see people involved in all the different leagues. We'll have more questions as we move throughout the rest of the show. The positive news, guys, there is 4 picks before our pick, 3 picks now as Cortland Sutton goes off the board. There hasn't been a single player so far that was in our queue when we mentioned only having 1 target that we wanted within the DeAndre Swift pick. All the other options have made it through to us. Another player, Sean, that I just want to mention when we are at this particular point, it may be a pick for the wraparound, but he is going at the moment in the 4th pick, or the 4th last pick off the 8th round, which is right around where we are picking. That is Tua. Does he become a conversation here for us to get that second quarterback and to kind of close out the position unless something really happens for us later on? Or because we did talk about the drafter in 4, we are going to have him picking after us, but then picking again before us. So the likelihood that Tua would fall past him twice is very small here.
It is. And so I want to throw that over to David, ask for his preference on how we build this out from a quarterback perspective. If we had Justin Fields and Tua, then, I mean, that's a lot of excitement at QB. We could stay with the 2 quarterbacks. That frees up a roster spot. But obviously there are going to be some other players who are exciting here, where once we've taken a Justin Fields, it's maybe less pressure to take a Tua. Some of the names, Brian Robinson, Quentin Johnston. I mean, Rashad Bateman actually comes a long way back around, even back around in the 10th to try and put with our Dolphins. Do you have a guy here, David, who would push you off of Tua as the QB choice to go with Hill?
Yeah, I mean, I would rather take Bateman or Johnston. I see you put more in there, maybe because of Brees, and I think I wouldn't want to take him here, maybe next round. But I don't draft Tua a lot, so having already taken Fields, it's hard to go Tua, especially with you got Dotson. So maybe Sam Howell later.
I would make the pitch here to step in and go with Tua. I'm going to try and veto this one.
Down.
I think that Quentin Johnston and Bateman will definitely come back to us. We take Quentin Johnston. That's the first pick now that I'm not.
So we have to take Tua now if he comes all the way.
There's no chance he's going to go at this pick now. He's definitely going to go before he gets back to us. He's going James Conner if he comes back to us. I always, but I also think that's a mistake for the team in 4, and maybe they're looking at the teams that have gone with Hurts, Allen, Mahomes are on these next 3 picks. So the likelihood of them
you're
also
saying it's definitely still going to happen before us.
It should if that drafter out of the 4 spot is paying attention. They have Waddle and they have no quarterback. Do
you ever feel more invested in other teams making the picks that you say they're going to make than having your guy come back to you?
I sometimes do it because I then am set up that I have the feeling of sadness is already, I skip sadness and I go straight to anger, and I just get the anger out of the system. How do you feel in hindsight now that we've taken Quentin Johnston?
Well, I went ahead and put that in because, I mean, I'm super fired up to have David on the show today, and that was the pick that he wanted. I do think that Johnston in 9 and Bateman in 10 are things that could very possibly happen by ADP. That's what ADP suggests. But there's also the case that even if we executed that, there are going to be other players that we potentially lose. And I do think that we also, are going to want to hit on a running back in this range if it ends up making sense. The running backs are going to go a lot earlier here, obviously, than they go in underdog. And so you can get wiped out at that position. When we have the Jahan Dotson pick, it does make for a really exciting potential selection of Sam Howell.
I love the way you mentioned that now. I was sure that was coming when we made the pick. We didn't get that opens the door to Sam Howell. I feel like that needs to be said after the.
It doesn't need to be said after an entire offseason of draft.
Yeah, I think now it's just assumed.
The click says it all.
Yeah. So the other thing just to watch in that is Terry McLaurin is also in the 6th spot, so there could be competition there just when we're looking ahead for that. But if Tua comes back here, are we all good to pick him? Can we all agree that he should have been picked in the 8th round, even if we get him in the 9th?
Well, again, I mean, it's not a matter of should have been, but it'll be interesting to see what that drafter does. And if we're able to pass Bateman, see if he comes back to us. The other pick there in terms of someone who could come back is a Kadarius Toney. Now, David, I've been really high on Rashee Rice. There's the news that he's going to be a package player. That doesn't really scare me off because, I mean, Kadarius Toney is a package player. People have been, wanting to draft him early, even when he's injured. But how are you looking at this Kansas City Chiefs offense? And again, I mean, this would be a play where, so Toney goes, but how are you thinking about this with Toney, with Rice, even maybe with Justin Ross at the very end of drafts, and how that fits with a team that has a T. Higgins?
I've been in on Rice. Everything seems better for him relative to the investment than the recent selections they've made in past years. Everything in the offseason has seemed better for him than it did for Sky Moore last year or Hardman years ago, Toney. I mean, so who knows what will happen, but I think, the value there potentially is huge. And I think that it being tamped down by the reports that he's a part-time player is just silly, but never. So here we are.
Perfect. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Exactly what I wanted to hear. So anyway, Tua does go as Colm had predicted. Part of what Colm is trying to do there is, push out into the universe this idea that he's going to get some reverse psychology over there. We have 20 seconds left. I would make the argument for Brian Robinson, who is below ADP here. Rashad Bateman, a good chance to make it back. But David, you have a strong preference between those two guys?
I'll let you do your thing, and I'll take my Brian Robinson exposure through overtime. I think that's a good idea.
There we go. There we go.
I do think that there's a chance here we'll get Bateman back on this one. Still trying to recover from the Quentin Johnson pick. Still trying to recover.
David, how are you looking at this backfield here with the Commanders? I have to admit that I am stunned that Brian Robinson with a 3-down profile is going behind his backup in fantasy drafts. Is that because I'm looking at it completely incorrectly? Where are you on this offense maybe in general? We've been joking about Sam Howell. Obviously, you're okay with that from a big picture perspective. Do you think the Commanders are going to go off this year? Do you think they're going to be decent? How do you think this offense manifests in 2023?
I mean, I think it's going to be the best offense that they've had since they've been called the Commanders. And probably, I think the fans should have something to be excited about as much as they did.
Since RG3.
Since RG3, yeah. So, I don't know. I mean, you guys did such a good job of covering Hal as a prospect that, even with the amount of coverage that there's been of kind of him trying to win this battle this offseason, it's like people still don't really realize what he did in college. And he played well at the end of this season last year. He's looked good in the preseason. Like as you've said, Sean, it's he hasn't shown the stuff you don't want to see if you're making that bet. So I guess I'm interested in how confident you are in the Brian Robinson over Gibson. And that's, I think for a long time in the beginning of this offseason, people were talking about Brian Robinson as if he didn't have that 3-down profile, and they must have missed some of the games where he actually was doing stuff in the pass game. But yeah, I mean, with Gibson caught he caught a touchdown, right? This in the preseason. Is that right?
They've both been involved, and you think about that main game where Howell played for a full half, and they combined for 7 catches in a half. And that part, I think, is exciting for both of them. But of those 7 catches, 4 of them go to Brian Robinson, who caught 35 passes as well. I think his 5th year there at Alabama. I mentioned him as the potential 2023 Josh Jacobs in my article on how to win the Fantasy Pros $1 million. So again, you're trying to figure out, where could drafters be completely wrong so you can win the full $1 million. And for me, one of the things that I noticed, I like Antonio Gibson. I actually think that he's a better pure running back than people realize. He was so good at the sort of pure running back element when he was a rookie. And yet he has not been as dynamic in that role since then. And the Commanders coaching staff, again, sort of prior to Bieniemy, had really soured on him to where before he was very sadly shot last year, I mean, it looked like Brian Robinson was going to get a massive workload.
Well, at that point of the season last year, Antonio Gibson was almost just going to be playing special teams. It had gotten to that point where Robinson was going to be the starter. He was named the starter. The incident happened shortly after. It looked like his season will be over. He comes back in, and even coming back from that injury, still was as productive as Antonio Gibson.
Yeah, I mean, he looked okay, which is probably a pretty big compliment considering what he was dealing with. And so the note that I have in the Zero RB update that's coming out is that we have made a lot of money over the last decade by playing the Antonio Gibson profile. But in those situations, what Brian Robinson is would have been priced in the 3rd or 4th rounds. And what Antonio Gibson is would be priced in the 11th or 12th rounds. To be in a draft environment where the backup is actually the more expensive of the two is wild. And so when I think of it like that, I'm thinking, and I'm probably overconfident even just what the roles are, because that's not how it's being priced.
You've said backup a couple of times. It's still, you know, there's so few running backs that we draft at this section of the draft that I would think of as a pure backup, you know. So I see it as similar to Denver, I guess, you know, and where it won't surprise me if in a season with Javonte Williams healthy, somehow Perine still outscores Javonte Williams, or it could go completely the other way, and Javonte Williams has a much bigger, you know, there's a huge fantasy point differential there, and I guess Washington's the same way. I won't really be that surprised, I guess, if Robinson gets the lion's share of the work, including equal or more in the receiving game. But I also won't be surprised if, you know, they basically score similarly, and or if Gibson outscores them by a bit. So I don't know.
And I agree with that, but I think that in that situation, they should be priced similarly to Javonte Williams and Perine, or to, as you kind of had alluded to earlier, with a couple of guys that maybe you're out on, or not out on, but just want to get them at good prices with Kenneth Walker and Travis Etienne. But there's still that, you know, gap between them and Bigsby and Charbonnet. My main point here would be that I do think that Robinson is more talented than people realize, has a better role than people realize, and should be priced up, not to the level of those other 3 guys, who I think are just huge talents, but should be priced up, and Gibson should be priced down a little bit. And then if Gibson ends up scoring similarly, then you win with Gibson. But where Gibson's being priced right now, I mean, Robinson has to get hurt for him to win. And that's really not a position I think drafters want to be in. Maybe it's a situation where, you know, Gibson has to be hurt for Robinson to win, and then like neither part of the play, you know, really works. So that's also a possibility. I guess when you follow what's happening with Washington, I'm surprised at the price. I mean, because one of the things that Robinson himself has said, and you want to take, you know, a little bit of, you know, skepticism about what the players themselves are saying, but I mean, he said, look, I got back. I'm glad about what I did, but I wasn't anywhere close to what I can be when I came back from the gunshot wound last year.
I also wonder if Gibson, you know, deserves a chance to have a better offense all around to see what he can do. Because when everyone was really in on him, I mean, who were the playmakers in that offense? I can't even remember. McLaurin,
Terry McLaurin, and
who
Logan
else?
Thomas.
Well, yeah.
Nobody else.
I think
Dyami Brown, no. Dyami Brown. We didn't get to see him too much. I
think that's a good point, because Antonio Gibson is extremely athletic, and we love that at running back. And he was very good as a rookie. We love someone who comes in immediately and performs well. Certainly, you know, the door is not slammed shut on Gibson as being a potential league winner either.
So we are 1 pick away. Since our last selection, Juju went off the board, Kincaid, Watson, Gibson, who you were talking about, Tyler Higbee, AJ Dillon, Jalen Warren, Sam Laporta, who I was hoping to get in this round, McKinnon, Juwan Johnson, Kirk Cousins, Charbonnet, Perine, and Mostert. So a couple of running backs we may have been interested in. Sam Laporta has certainly been interested in. Bateman does make it back around. At this point, I would mention Cole Kmet as a potential option as well. Tight ends are moving a little bit quicker in this draft than they would normally. He usually is an ADP at the back end of the 11th round, but you know, we may get him in the mid 11th. Something to consider here. Sean, which way are you leaning here? We know that I think Bateman may be the way that Dave wants to go here.
Yeah, Bateman made it back. I'm ready to pull the trigger, unless, David, you've seen something else come up in the interim that you prefer.
I don't really expect a tight end to go before we pick again. So, yeah, I think we're safe in that.
Okay, so we take Bateman there. We'll see what happens over the next couple of picks. Sean, I'm going to bounce in one more listener question here before the next selection. We get a couple of keeper questions coming in. We have one from Wee Cooking. He needs to cut, well, not that he needs to cut 7 players, but needs to move 7 players in this Dynasty League. It started off with a tweet to ask me, would I, you can answer this, Sean. Would you trade Brenton Ayuk and Nico Collins for a 2024 first that would be mid-round at worst?
Mid-round at worst equals, I don't know what it's going to be. That's the trouble.
Well, it could be the 12th pick.
Right.
Well, David, you're going to do some Dynasty content for us, or at least there's that possibility. You're in a bunch of leagues. Again, there are so many other considerations that go in here, but would you, for me, Nico Collins is not
part of it.
Really.
Well, it's part of it if you're planning to win. I mean, it's also, I think you can trade Nico Collins separate. I mean, if you're trading Brandon Ayuk for a first, I don't think you need to be adding. And I think you need to be confident that it's not just a late first. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, one of the points that David makes here that I think is really important and people can miss is that it's so easy to think a certain thing is going to happen for the next season, and then we don't find that to be the case. I know that, 2022 was a weird year, and the veterans both were the highest scoring players and kind of stayed healthy where the young guys did not. But a lot of the teams that I had projected for bottom 4 were league winners last season because guys who were kind of on their last legs, made a difference in 2022 as opposed to collapsing. So that's something to keep in mind. There are a lot of dynasty leagues where there will be a team or a handful of teams that just have so much more depth that even a variety of injuries are not going to really change things, or teams that are just so weak that even if they had multiple guys break out, it'd be kind of what this listener is asking about, where it's sort of like middle of the round at best. I like Brandon Ayuk. It's going to be hard for him to score at a level that is a true championship kind of guy and to do that over the long term because there are so many other talented players in that offense. And so if you need to move some value into 2024, if you have the type of roster that can withstand a Brandon Ayuk trade, then I might be a little bit tempted there. But certainly if you pull up the tiers, you're going to see that Brandon Ayuk is worth more than that. I don't have much of a value on Nico Collins. I don't think that Houston is going to do much, and I don't think that he's their best receiver. But I think that Dave's point there too, you can trade him separately, and the perception of Collins, and I could easily be wrong, but the perception of Collins is enough to make those moves separately. So I think you're giving up more value than you're getting back, but I also don't think that Brandon Ayuk should be completely off the table.
That's pretty fair. Team is pretty loaded at wide receivers. Garrett Wilson, T. Higgins, Treylon Burks, Brandon Ayuk, Jordan Addison, George Pickens, Sky Moore, Bateman, then Collins goes into the ranks. When we look here as we get ready to get back on our clock for selection, Sean, there is other players like Collins there. I know you're not going to want to be cutting Gainwell in this situation, David, but Gainwell is there, Ty Chandler, Jerome Ford, Kendry Miller, Rashawn Johnson, Sean Tucker, Daniel Bellinger, Tyler Kraft, Khalid Shakir, Bell, Pierre Strong, Justin Ross, Albert O, Taquan Thornton. So he's in kind of that position where the players are worth something, but not worth a huge amount. And with having to cut 7 of those, it's going to be a pretty tight squeeze. What would you be looking to do in terms of trying to get down to that cut down? Would you be picking certain players that are ready to cut straight away, Sean, from that list? And I know we're 1 pick away here. We can bounce to the question back after if we have to.
Yeah, let's look here at our options. Marvin Mims, somebody that I think we want to at least consider, but his ADP shows him coming back. Rashee Rice, ADP shows him definitely coming back. Jamal Williams is sadly vaguely relevant with the Kendry Miller situation. I put him on there just to kind of remind us that he is a good, really boring pick there. A-Chain probably doesn't come back. And now with Jeff Wilson on IR, I think he is extremely exciting again and would give us potentially a 4th, tournament winning type of play here. I mean, the safe pick is to go with Cole Kmet. That matches up with our QB.
I like A-Chain, especially on this team, but I'm open to whatever.
I think we're going to get really done at tight end in this draft if we don't take Kmet here.
Colin, are you? We outvoted you before, but are you?
Cole Kmet I like Achane, but the roster's not going to. We're going to be in trouble here, I think, at tight end. Go for Achane though. That makes it like I don't understand the Tua pick more that we have added in Achane. That will be the one that I'll go back to.
Well, Quentin Johnston will be an interesting guy to track. They continue to report that, I mean, he's not even going to be that involved in week one. That is a little problematic for us because, you know, Rashad Bateman, a little bit of a wild card. We do need some of those guys to be in the lineup. We got to have 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, 2 flexes. We want to start scoring. We can't afford to get too far behind in that starting lineup early on. And yet Quentin Johnston, I mean, I had him in my second round when Ben and I did the 2024 redraft look ahead. Quentin Johnston's upside, again, is tournament winning. And one of the things that, Colin, we ran into that was a huge surprise to us, I think, was that in the 2021 contest, it was actually the wide receiver position that we were struggling so dramatically to get points from there at the end. I think there's a chance that Cole Kmet comes back through because he's just not a sexy pick and because we have the quarterback that he goes with. I also don't think that we necessarily are going to look at that and say that Cole Kmet was the difference in winning or losing, because there are guys here who project to accomplish a lot of the same types of things. And so this will be the perfect team to get a lot of our late guys. And I think that Hunter Henry is the best tight end still available, and he tends to go really late. His ADP currently is in 14. So really late is an exaggeration, but we have a shot at him. We're going to have Michael Mayer, who is a really strong pick. We're going to have Trey McBride. Colin, you and I selected Durham Smythe with Blair Andrews. I think that that is a strong pick late. If we're going to go with volume, I mean, even in this format, even volume is hard to get. And so we want to be aware of that as we move through. But tight end is, it's the position that has the most fun upside guys late, and handling it with volume is a good player. I mean, Mike Gesicki, somebody who doesn't go until round 17, and because of some of the news around Hunter Henry has probably been overly punished. I would say that Gesicki is a multi-round value late there as well.
Not as confident as Sean that this is all going to work out, but let's go back to the keeper question, Sean, to see what we might do here for Wee Cooking, who sent that one over. In terms of guys like that are outright cuttable, you're obviously talking about the Eagles so far in this draft. Alberto over there now, but there isn't many guys who are straight up cuts on this team, Sean. So would that lean you more into that question that he originally came in with, that far to move Ayuk?
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we talked about in the Dynasty Reanimator series, especially as it relates to the RB Triflex cut down, where, I mean, you've got to get down to the 20 players. And if you have followed our perpetual reloading strategy, where, I mean, you could have 25, you could have 30. I've got a team with 31 players that has to get down 11. Now, in that case, usually there are 3 or 4 where those players are back to the point where there's just no value, but you do still have to get down quite a few guys. And I think that one of the problems that managers run into is they think, okay, well, I'm going to trade the 25th, 26th, 27th guys on my roster, as opposed to thinking, okay, I'm going to trade the 8th, 9th, and 10th guys, because those guys have a lot of value, but because of the overall depth of my roster, I can actually move those guys on. And so if you don't have clear cuts, then I think trading a star works in Dynasty. We think about Brandon Ayuk. He's a peak type of player, and yet 2 years from now, are you going to be able to trade him for a similar type of thing? Almost certainly not. And so if you can't play the guy for 2 years and then trade him at either the same or an elevated price, and you have a good offer to move him now, or you can work with that manager to get a little bit more and accomplish both of your objectives, then I recommend doing that. The problem that most dynasty managers run into is they start moving guys too late as opposed to moving them too early.
Good stuff. So we are now 2 picks away from our next selection. Cole Kmet did go. We have Hunter Renfrow, Jordan Love, Romeo Dobbs going since that. So we're picking now, and 2 picks. Okonkwo goes off the board. Marvin Mims, Rashid Rice would be 2 options here. If we hadn't Swift, it would be kind of a zone where we'd be looking at potentially getting Penny. Anyone else standing out? Tyler Algier also potential option in this range. Anything for you, Dave?
Well, I think you should make a call on a tight end.
I don't want any. The tight ends here are no good. We're waiting for later
now
on.
We've missed Kmet, and so we got to wait longer.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say, I think that we could select. So Dulcich goes in this range, and I think actually is still probably a similar type of pick to Cole Kmet. Obviously, the preseason hasn't been great for him. If we take him here, we have a guy, and then we can pass Mims and Rice through. Colm, are you completely out on Dulcich?
No, not completely out, but
David, are you out on Dulcich?
Close to out, but so I was on.
I think in this team, I was about to say the upside could have been there. I'm probably looking at Algier and Roshan Johnson, Tyjae Spears over Dulcich.
So I'll move them into the queue, make sure we're thinking about them. Spears.
This is really far for Penny to fall, right?
It is. It's kind of surprising. I think we're used to the guys that draft Penny.
Right. We take Penny a lot in the different drafts. Penny is 1104. We're now at the 1210. Roshan Johnson goes there. Just don't think Penny is necessarily a good fit for this team. One of the reasons that I was thinking about moving Mims through or passing on him is that we're getting to the point where we're at the limit for receivers, and Rice is still an interesting pick. But I think that we could make the Rice pick in this next round and see what happens. The problem that we have, though, is that because he played so well in the preseason, if we don't take Sam Howell with this next pick, then he probably doesn't come back to us. And so we're boxed in a little bit from that perspective.
I have a fun one for you. We could take Dulcich, and then we'd have Mims and Dulcich, and we could take Russell Wilson.
Yeah, I mean, Quentin Johnston with Mims and Dulcich opposite him would be a really good setup. And the flip side of the Sam Howell rise is that, I mean, Russell Wilson's ADP is the 12-11, and yet he's a guy that goes anywhere. I mean, he can go 3 rounds early, he can go 3 rounds late. People are all over the place on Russell Wilson. And so that one, I think, is kind of interesting. I mean, Russell Wilson only appeals to me well below ADP, but we'd be kind of setting that possibility up with what we're doing.
And I'm going to call it again. I think the drafter in 4 will take Russell Wilson on the way back here. Jerry Jeudy team. I don't really want Russell Wilson.
I think he passes him through.
I don't want Wilson. Don't make us make that call. I'm with Sean. Dulcich didn't go off, so that's not to be worried about.
I also think that just with Johnston and Mims together, we can go with Russell Wilson. Not necessarily here, though. I think you can really push him
I think
through.
It would have to fall through in maybe the 14th. But what are we thinking here in terms of Howell? So most drafts we would be in this spot, we would be starting to look at really into the 0RB guys. I mentioned Sharp, Algier, for example. But in this draft, we have Hall, Swift, Robinson, A-Chain. So I think that Sean's probably right in terms of looking here towards Howell, who usually goes at the 1303 at this particular point. We'd be picking here at the... Sorry.
And yet there are 4 quarterbacks ahead of him in ADP still available.
Well, one of the things there is, they do just tend to all go right in a pack at this point.
Can I get Noward, please? Russell Wilson goes to the draft
Russell
round 4.
Wilson, he does go there. That's all right. That's what we wanted anyway. We wanted to have Johnston, Mims, but not be stuck with the QBs. Well, I mean, if you were stuck with Justin Herbert, you would take that, but that would be way too expensive. So we are back up. I think the two choices here are Sam Howell, Tyjae Spears, Rashee Rice, a potential guy to come back around. Obviously, we haven't addressed tight end, but we're looking at a really fun, like just late tight end approach.
I'm being honest. I think we're into a 5 tight end build after we get our quarterback here.
I agree.
So we take Howell here, Sean, or do you want to go with one of the running backs?
Probably makes sense to go with Howell here.
It always makes sense to go with Howell.
Do you prefer Spears to Howell in this team?
It feels simpler to just get Howell now.
Okay.
Could you imagine if Dave comes on this show and now everyone who listens to the podcast is listening to him and he talks us out of drafting Sam Howell? Could you imagine what that would do?
Well, it's also something where you can't go down with your brand being tied to passing on Sam Howell when you have Jahan Dotson and being like 2 points away from winning the $200,000. You just have to think of what the incentives are.
I feel like Sam Howell is pretty much at the start of the Road of His Overtime podcast. Tyler Boyd I felt like the poster boy for the podcast, Sean. I feel like Sam Howell is now part of our identity.
Can we get an update to the intro once we have a call for a Sam Howell?
I think we should, because I was actually going to I've meant to do this for a couple of weeks as ask on the show who should be in the intro, because we do tend to update it every season. So that's a perfect time to ask people to pitch in with intro ideas of who should be in it. I think Sam Howell has to make it in there. How are you feeling so far, Dave, as to how this team is playing out? I'm excited. Maybe concerned about tight end, but I'm excited. I love when I can get Sean.
It's your concern about tight end is so fun that I can't decide how concerned I can possibly be.
Yeah.
Or should actually be here, because
David and I are going to.
Sean doesn't seem that worried.
Tight ends, so. Like, can we just go with zero tight ends?
It just seems like there's so many. I mean, one of the things, if we had had more time to talk before this started, because, again, going back to drafting in 18 rounds on Underdog, the extra 2 rounds to me, and especially now because I feel like we don't need a third quarterback, it just seems like it's inviting you to push tight ends so you can take more at the end of the draft.
So what you're saying is if you had thought more about it before we drafted and realized there was 2 extra rounds, you would have even pushed tight end further?
I knew there was.
No, I know that. I'm only joking. But
no. Well, I guess to me, if once we didn't get Goddard, I just don't really care about what happens. I could wake up in round 16 and just draft tight ends to close it out. And I think I wouldn't feel the concern that we saw you feeling earlier.
I think the reason that I have that concern is when we look at tight ends that go in this range, there is options and we'll often talk about them on the podcast, but there's options that we like late, but there is only, say, 5 options through these last 6-7 rounds. So once we miss out on Dulcich, who we passed on, there's not a huge amount of options. There's a lot of players here that will get kind of lost in the wash. The one thing, Sean, that the Sam Howell pick opens us up to is we can draft Logan Thomas. So everything will be okay when we get to the end of this draft. I'm excited. Can't wait to get Logan Thomas back on the roster here. But all joking aside, Sean, the team is in, I think, excellent shape outside of that one position. And I do think that we're going to have a lot of luck off the draft gods here to get those guys that we really want to get through the remainder of the draft.
I guess we should start figuring out who's the first one going to be.
It's going to be Logan Thomas in the 19th round.
So I do think that we want to take Hunter Henry here. He's such a strong selection. The only other thing I'm looking at, and really what we want. So we have 7 picks remaining. And of those 7 picks, we probably want 1 running back. We could probably allow ourselves 1 receiver and then at least 4 tight ends. And then that final pick could be whatever the best player available is. But we do probably have to start on the tight end position here. The only thing that I'm looking at is that Rashee Rice is below his ADP even from the last couple of days. Now, again, I think that he can probably pass through because people have been talking about him so negatively. But the question would be, is he the kind of the last guy that we'd be looking at receiver? Again, to kind of put opposite T. Higgins and then full tight end. So my pitch would be Hunter Henry right here. We hope Rashee Rice comes back to us. If he doesn't, then we want to keep loading up on the tight end position. I mean, this is a couple spots below ADP again, in around 14. Doesn't necessarily mean that much, but I do feel a lot of relief now to have gotten Hunter Henry.
Yeah, I think for me, Henry's the clear choice here, right at ADP, and we're in dire need of tight ends.
So we'll go ahead and hit that one there. Dave, the guy I wanted to ask you about, who, I mean, there have been reports in a variety of ways. One of the things we talk about constantly on OT is going after the big talents. But the reporting has been, and it's now a little bit more relevant question because Rashee Rice does sadly go. Tyler Conklin has been talked up as the potential number 2 weapon with the New York Jets. Are you buying or selling that in your own drafts?
I definitely take Conklin, and especially I like pairing him with Breece. It may, it's anecdotal, but I just remember Kittle and CMC playing off each other in week 16 to get me through to week 17. And, when you're around that goal line, I think having Breece and Conklin gives you 2 paths to get a touchdown. So I like it.
And if he does make it another 4 picks here, that will be a decent value on him too, as he has gone at 14.05 in the last 3 days. So we'll hope for that. A backup selection then would be Michael Mayer, who doesn't project to come back, and he does go. So now it's even more a thing where we really want Conklin to come through these 3 picks.
Yeah, I would have been some between the 2 of those. Which one do we want to go for? The value definitely would have been on Conklin, and I would have went for him to see if we got Mayer back through in the 16th round, but obviously that's a long way from happening. So 3 selections to go till we get to our pick. Then Sean,
this drafter only has Kelsey.
Yeah, so this will be the one that this is the pick of most concern. So we'll see what happens.
Maybe he wants Knox with Richardson or with Allen.
Yeah, that would probably make more sense for him.
He takes Hodgins.
So we should have the option here. Then I think Sean, Kendre Miller would be the other player that would potentially make sense, and that for me would only be if Conklin is gone here. But I think in the next round, then you're into Trey McBride as the preferred option if we could get him back in the 16th. Any thoughts on McBride if Conklin's gone here, though?
Well, I've been concerned about what the Cardinals have done at the quarterback position, but I think one guy who could potentially withstand that would be Trey McBride. Now, I prefer to have him as the tight end 3, and yet, I mean, he's one of those just huge upside plays where, I mean, his price has not made any sense. Now, the floor is absolutely 0. So from that perspective, I can understand how Trey McBride gets pushed down, and yet the ceiling there is to go in the same range as a guy, in rounds 8 or 9. And so that part I think is exciting. The main thing here, the fallback pick for me was Kendre Miller. He actually goes, but that means Tyler Conklin does come to us. Dave made a great argument for him. I'm going to go ahead and just make this pick.
Yep. It's going to be a run of purple here, I think, for us. It's just going to be purple picks for the tight end position moving forward. I do think that if we look at, since we made the Howell pick, there has been 3 tight ends that have gone, and to get 2 of those, I think, is a big relief. We'll see then how it goes over the next couple of rounds. But what I was saying about the tight end position and the targets, Mayer is one of those prime targets that I'll be looking to get, and obviously he's gone now, so it starts to limit it out. If we miss out on Trey McBride, for example, it's we're into Kate Otten, Mike Gesicki, Logan Thomas, Durham Smythe. But Durham Smythe, Sean, is going to be the pick we need because that's who we drafted with Blair as well.
If Durham Smythe hits, then both of these teams into the finals. I really like this team now. I mean, I always like to push early and have sort of a gutsy build, because so often when you do that, you will get what you need late. To get Henry a couple picks below ADP and Conklin around below ADP, I mean, that really makes some of our early choices, I think, look very good right now.
Yeah, I think like the thread in the needle is really how that works out. And there is a point where the likelihood of it working out gets very slim. I know both of you guys were very relaxed about it, but just for people who are drafting, it can come back to fall apart. So I'm excited now, because if we happen to get, let's say, Trey McBride coming back to us, I think we start to get into just a phenomenally strong position then with the three of those guys at tight end. So we do have quite a bit to go. There's 12 picks. He is somebody who usually goes off the board, in that 17th round, usually at the back of it. So I'm hopeful that in the mid 16th he's an option. Is there anyone else in the queue at the moment that will be standing out to you as a potential target here, either tight end or non-tight end, that we haven't talked about yet, Dave?
Well, I mean, I can't really wrap my head around drafting Logan Thomas in 23, regardless of what we think about the Commanders. I mean, I don't. Do we think Logan Thomas is? No, but does he have Sam Howell at quarterback, or does Sam Howell have some yet undetermined tight end or tight ends?
We can't push tight end to the 14th round and then
I can't draft Logan Thomas ahead of Noah Fant, and I don't think I can take him ahead of Isaiah Likely on this team. And even Taysom Hill. I mean, I just don't expect Logan Thomas to score points in enough total games to bother with him. But
the one thing about the tight end premium as well, it does get into a point where, if a tight end has 5 or 6 catches, and a touchdown, it becomes like they become a flex option in this particular format.
I'm just worried he's not even going to play 5 or 6 games, I guess.
Is that injury related or performance?
Yeah, I mean, when's the last time we got a real season out of Logan Thomas? It just seems like
his first season at Washington.
Seems like forever ago.
Yeah, he has the last 2 seasons. He's
39 catches last year, 18. I feel like this team has moved past needing Logan Thomas.
They have some interesting guys behind him. One of the things, I think he would be very trendy right now if he hadn't missed almost their entire lead up to the season with injury. There's an article on him from the Washington Post today talking about how he's finally healthy and ready to go and is going to be a huge part of this offense, in part because this offense the Bieniemy has brought over, has that emphasis with the Travis Kelce part of it. Now, I'm not saying that we necessarily target Logan Thomas. I'm just trying to balance out the different things, because I think what both of you are saying are key parts of it, where Thomas is a pretty narrow path type of guy.
I think that if we're
fit what we're kind of looking at. The problem for me with Isaiah Likely is that one just also seems extremely narrow when he's behind the best tight end in football other than Kelce, and they've added those receivers. If they hadn't added those receivers, I think Likely would be like really exciting, because there are some things to what he has done, his peripherals, all of that jump out. I mean, for me, both of those guys are tricky. I mean, Taysom Hill now with Derek Carr there, it seems like they probably have moved beyond him as a gadget guy, or at least to that extent. Now, if that means he actually plays actual tight end a little more and gets out there and catches some passes, it just is one where Taysom Hill probably a better pick in formats where you're looking for that rare touchdown, as opposed to a tight end premium where he catches a bunch of passes.
And I probably did, like, it was kind of a bet when it started, but I had to continue it on then, just for the debating point of it. The likelihood of Logan Thomas having a 50 catch season is probably a lot slimmer than him having his season like his first season with Washington. For example, that season he had 72 receptions on 110 targets, but since that he's at 18 receptions and 39 receptions, like you mentioned. Before that, he had 16 receptions, 12 receptions, and 17 receptions as all of his season totals. So he's 164 career receptions, 72 of those coming in 2020. So there is a lot of stuff from your side, but at this point of the draft in a Sam Howell team, if things click into the right way. And the other part is, like, we like, obviously, Dotson, like McLaurin, but there still has to be targets to go around the rest of that offense. So it's kind of, those weeks.
I don't think I've ever heard Sean talk about Cole Turner, so I don't really know if you have any thoughts about him in the last round with Howell as opposed to Thomas.
That one is just so tricky because those guys have looked pretty good in preseason and whatnot. And there have even been rumors that Logan Thomas would get cut or traded or something to that effect. It doesn't look like that is going to be what happens. And so for me, even though the Commanders love to talk up how important the tight end position is in their offense, I'm like, you have Jahan Dotson and Terry McLaurin, and you have Curtis Samuel to be that gadget guy. You've got these two running backs that we like
as well. Yeah. So
if the offense doesn't do that. Yeah, I mean, if the offense doesn't run through those guys, then I think that you're designing it wrong or the play calling isn't optimal. So I would be okay leaning into Howell and Dotson as being the path. And I think that once you take Dotson and then certainly once you take Howell behind it, you really are betting on Dotson having that massive blow-up season that Blair Andrews has written about extensively. I didn't want to say it until it happened. It just McBride should not be going after some of these other players. Anybody else that we want to look at here?
No.
So we'll click on McBride. Darnell Mooney was somebody who, if we hadn't gotten caught in this 3 tight end run, the need to add tight ends, he would have been someone in round 15 who was interesting as kind of that deep shot with Justin Fields. Again, I think that the thesis on Fields, and one of the reasons that you take him in the middle of 5, is that he has so many ways to win and doesn't need his guys with him. And that flexibility allows you to pursue what you want later in the draft as opposed to having to force it.
An interest in Claypool is that deep shot later on?
Yeah, that was what I was going to ask. Are you selecting Claypool in round 18 on your Justin Fields teams, round 18, round 20 in this particular circumstance?
I think earlier in the summer it was easier to, but I'm somebody who got really excited about Claypool in Dynasty, traded for him a lot. So sometimes with those players, when other people are still holding out hope, it was a harder letdown for you, so you just kind of leave it alone. So that's kind of where I'm at on Claypool. I think, especially with the strength of wide receiver at this team, it's just kind of like, give me a bunch of other random tight ends. I think would do more for us.
Yep.
The tricky part as well, Sean, you mentioned the wide receiver. When we had our team in the finals, we had a situation where DJ Moore wasn't really hitting that season in Carolina, but we had, Elijah Moore was a player we were hoping might have come back off injured reserve. Once you get a couple of injuries and you're in these finals and players are maybe not 100%, every single one of those bodies is a little bit of a ticket that could potentially go off in that final. And that would be kind of the only thing. Again, when I mentioned Thomas or when I mentioned Claypool, that would be the main reason.
I would rather draft Dyami Brown than Chase Claypool.
I can see that.
And
Sean, tell me who else was not productive in that team in the final in 2021?
Well, you mentioned Elijah Moore, and I mean,
Dyami Brown was on that team as well.
There you go. The Elijah Moore one was so tough because
that was so tough.
David, you mentioned the guy who scored for you the week after it mattered. we were watching all week long to see if Elijah Moore was going to play. And then at the last moment, they're like, yeah, it doesn't matter to us. We're going to hold him out another week. And then he went off in what would have been week 17 that year, or we were already to week 18, whatever it was. He goes off on the final week that was non-fantasy relevant. We're like, just have that in there as opposed to having to rely on Jarvis Landry. It seemed like Landry was going to get it done. He did not. So as we get back to the draft here, the disappointing thing, at least for me, was Sean Tucker goes at 16-11. I wanted him to be kind of our last running back. I think he's a must draft in every league at this point. I think he's going to be the Tampa Bay starter from mid-season on. We lose him. We still have some other options. You were talking about guys we could put in at the last round and might make a huge difference. Wan'Dale Robinson is somebody who, when you're trying to figure out how you can use your final picks on someone who not only would like be out there, but could put up a 30 in week 17 to win the whole thing. Wan'Dale, just a very obvious selection, I think. We are getting to the point where
you like him over Hyatt, just straight up.
I do. I think that Hyatt is probably a year away. But Hyatt and Robinson are the two guys I think people should be drafting from that team.
Robinson, I actually really like is going undrafted in this format.
Yeah, that shouldn't be happening. So Clyde Edwards-Helaire comes here. I haven't been picking him at all, but for this particular team, and we have two guys who are going at the 16-17, or Cade Otton is going 16-01. He comes all the way through for us. The Buccaneers don't really have, I mean, we like Trey Palmer, but they don't really have a third wide receiver beyond the two main guys. Is this a pretty easy Cade Otton pick?
It's only taken a year, but the bet has worked out. Sean is tied in Cade Otton picks. I can't believe it. I can't believe this is real.
I like it.
Okay.
Skipping on Tua earlier has been everything's been made okay now. Sean has picked Otton.
Colin has gotten everything he wanted by missing on Tua. We've got 4 tight ends in a row. One of them is Cade Otton.
I'm pretty sure, Sean, that's the first time we've ever drafted Otton together.
Oh, it is. It's definitely the first. And it's also going to be the one that wins the entire tournament for us.
I thought you were going to say it's definitely going to be the last. But it
also is definitely going to be the last. So Jalen Hyatt and Wan'Dale Robinson. I love both of these guys. Wan'Dale Robinson was one of our main targets a season ago. It didn't work out. And that was a big dynasty target. And I think it's still going to work out in dynasty. It was so frustrating because he has the injuries early. Then he looks good for a couple games. Then he gets injured and misses the rest of the season. I still think he is the star in that passing game eventually. But I mean, Blair and I like Jalen Hyatt so much during the draft process that we had him as like the 109, 110 in Superflex Dynasty until he fell so much in the reality draft. Then you've got to obviously move him down a little bit. But now all of the reports are that he's been fantastic in training camp and exactly what you saw in that game against Alabama, where it was interesting because we would bring a lot of college football experts onto the show during the draft season, and people kept telling us it's gimmicky, they hit him. And I'm just like, you can't gimmick your way to what he did against Alabama. And now he supposedly has been the breakout star of Giants training camp. Similar to the situation with Rashee Rice and Justin Ross, I think that Jalen Hyatt and Wan'Dale Robinson, you're probably looking for them to hit on the final third of the year, but I guess I think they're going to hit. David, is that how you are looking at those two guys? Do you think that Hyatt could hit early? I mean, one of the things that's just been tough is that they've created a real logjam there at the wide receiver position.
Yeah. It is tough because, you know, there's positive things you can say about the 3 veterans there as well. And, I mean, I think what we saw in the and we're not even talking about Waller. And I think what you saw in the preseason, Waller and Campbell getting heavily targeted, you know, it's hard to guess what will happen. It all just makes me like Daniel Jones more, but it's hard to pick. So it's generally, I just wait and I'll take the guy who's available later. But this feels really late for Hyatt, so that's what's interesting, I guess.
Yeah, and Sean mentioned Robinson. I'm surprised that both of those guys continue to go so late, and I think part of why they are going so late is people are uncomfortable with the amount of wide receivers that are in the the competition and the room. But I think, as Sean mentioned, as the season goes on, it might be the last third of the season, but I would fully expect those guys to start to work their way past some of the veterans. Hyatt does go off the board at the 17-12. Isaiah Likely then goes off the board after that. So we are 6 picks away, but we have 3 selections left. Sean, you mentioned that at running back, obviously we did miss out on Sean Tucker would have been somebody we would have really liked to get on this roster, but any of the running back names that are left here standing out for you, the likes of Zamir White, Jerome Ford, Chase Brown, potentially, any of those running backs standing out?
Well, I still think that one of the Bengals running backs is going to hit. I think that anybody who has a lot of confidence in which one it's going to be either has a lot of inside information or is maybe overconfident. I like all 3 guys. I mean, Chris Evans is the trendy guy right now. I think the other 2 players are more skilled running backs. And so that makes it difficult.
The other pitch I was going to ask, or the other question I was going to ask, is we obviously have taken Hunter Henry in this particular draft. Mike Gesicki is still available at this point of the draft. He usually goes at the 1802. So we have 2 selections to go. But would you have any interest in adding him with Hunter Henry to this tight end crew?
I do. And so it's really a matter of whether or not Dave is okay with that. I think they basically play 2 different positions. They have absolutely no wide receivers. They also don't have other interesting tight ends.
Is he healthy right now?
Yeah, he's just come back, and my understanding is that he is good to go. Now, anytime that you have gotten to this point and it's close, and I think you still have some questions. Is that what you're seeing there?
Yeah, he's back in practice 2 days ago.
I think the upside, at the start of draft season,
guy I really want. So
at the start of draft season, this was flipped, and I remember, Sean, we did an underdog draft, and I mentioned about Hunter Henry, and he was going undrafted at that particular point, but it has flipped now to the point where Hunter Henry's in the 14th round of a tight end premium format, and then 4 picks later, Mike Gesicki is available. And I think it's gone way too far. And I know Gesicki is somebody that you really liked his profile in Miami last season in particular. They didn't really use him and didn't work him into things. But with this roster, I think taking shots on players like Mike Gesicki is a smart bet. And again, to go back, there was a lot of concern when we were waiting on tight end. But if we look since we took Hunter Henry, there has only, outside of our picks, there has only been 5 other tight ends selected, and that's Michael Mayer, Hayden Hurst, Dawson Knox, Noah Fant, and Isaiah Likely. And I think that we've had... I said that the fantasy gods were going to smile upon us. I think they really have, because even after this, there is still other... I think the reason that you said you would take Mike Gesicki is because now it's unlikely that we draft Logan Thomas, but like Taysom Hill is somebody who was touched on earlier. There's a couple of guys still left who usually would be gone at this point, so pretty happy with that. I think both of those guys could alternate their productive weeks in this offense. Both of them also could miss time, which means that one of them would be the clear tight end 1, and I think you're covering the bets at this late cost. So when Justin Ross went, may have been somebody in consideration. Zamir White, Sean, was one of the running backs I mentioned. He has gone. We have 2 picks left. Probably feels like the problem here is finding the guys we want, but you mentioned Wendell. He is still available. So at this particular point, are we still looking here at, I think we probably should get another running back in. I don't want to waste a pick just for the sake of it at running back, but is it a wide receiver and a running back for you, Sean?
Yes, unless Dave has 2 running backs that he would like, in which case I think that makes plenty of sense as well. Justin Ross would have been interesting really late. I was kind of hoping that he would come back to us in 19. That's not going to work out, but that's also fine. I like Wandale a lot here. The other name that is pretty interesting, I think that the Indianapolis Colts passing game is going to be an absolute train wreck, but within that, the best sort of price situation is Josh Downs. So we could go that way. All of the Cincinnati backs are available. It could even be something where we took 2 of them Dave, what are you looking at with Chris Evans, Chase Brown, and Travion Williams right now? Do you have a lean or an insight into how that backfield's going to play out?
No, I know. And so I've been churning through Evans and Williams on dynasty waivers that are open because, you're just trying to have the one that's going to work. But here it just feels, I wouldn't want to take two. It could be two dead spots, and I think it's hard to pick one. I liked it back when Travion was the guy, It's
I
just
really did
gotten
too.
more confusing from there.
Yep. What about Pierre Strong? So we have Ford. He is supposedly going to be okay for week 1. The Browns really like him, but then they make that move. And Pierre Strong, I mean, he's one of these guys where I feel like if he got 100 carries, the team that put him out there 100 times,
You have 1,000 yards, right?
Awesome.
He was 10
yards per carry.
Exactly. So, Dave, who do you like here? Who would you like us to take in round 19?
Well, you've got Zach Evans in the queue, and you haven't talked about him, so let's hear what you think about
He
him.
didn't get cut, right? And since he didn't get cut, I'm just like, that dude is the most talented back on their roster. I guarantee you he's the most talented back there. I mean, is he also the 4th in the pecking order? I mean, it seems like probably. Yeah. So that makes it tough.
I think you should take the receiver that you want the most and see. But you think we should take a running back?
Not necessarily. I don't think the running back position is going to dry up the same way that wide receiver would kind of fall off a cliff if Robinson goes. I think in the second half of the season, Robinson's going to be, that wide receiver 2-3 turn, like the tier, like wide receiver 24, 25 range. 86 wide receivers have already been taken. There's no, I mean, it just.
Yeah, if he's involved and healthy, he's going to do a lot more than that.
So we'll go ahead and click him there. And again, there's an argument for kind of balancing out the roster a little bit. We're going to be very much at sort of the whims of fate with the 4 runners we have, but I really like those 4 guys. Certainly Breece Hall, DeAndre Swift, Devin Achane, massive talent, big upside. I've made my pitch for Brian Robinson. If you can get 2 of them staying healthy and scoring, then we'll be in good shape there. I like how we've addressed the tight end position. It's pretty fun too, because the Roster Construction Explorer loves the 5 tight end, but you don't get in that many situations where it makes any sense, so you don't do it. Well, we did it here. And so that part has to be pretty
and not just 5 total, but 5 in a row, yeah.
Yeah. We lined them up and
it really stands out on the board, that big block of purple.
It's like folks thought they could stop us using the OT rankings, but we responded by taking 5 consecutive tight ends.
And there was a bit of fortune in it because there is a few, below ADP. We did take McBride above ADP, but we have seen now since the Gesicki pick, Darnell Washington, Taysom Hill go off the board, Cole Turner, Logan Thomas. Big get for the drafter out of the 11 after getting the draft Cole Kmet, who I mentioned. You mentioned Noah Fant. Now he takes Logan Thomas. So that team is set at tight end.
I was just going to say another name to throw out here, and probably isn't draftable, although I think just because the last couple of times he was in a decent situation, he got hurt, it makes it look worse. Again, we're talking about 74 running backs have been taken. There are not 74 running backs who are more talented than Justice Hill. And if anything were to happen to J.K. Dobbins, I think Justice Hill absolutely blows up. Now,
Great.
I certainly hope nothing happens to J.K. Dobbins, but we know that he has had some injury issues, and all running backs obviously are one play away from getting hurt.
Someone's listening to this, Sean.
Man, Justice Hill goes
Whose house
2001.
One of our houses is bugged.
While you're talking about him. Oh my goodness.
So I do like that pick. Pick. Dave, when you mentioned Zach Evans there, is that because is he somebody that you're adding to the end of all your dynasty rosters?
Well, you can't really because he's not on waivers. People that drafted him haven't dropped him. So I don't have a lot. But when I look at him versus Strong versus even Chris Evans, there's a path where he is actually, 60+% of the work in the backfield. And I don't think that's there really for Pierre Strong or Chris Evans or whatever. So he's interesting, definitely as a last round pick from that standpoint.
You always kind of wonder too, the Kansas City Chiefs have done some of the most ridiculous things from a personnel perspective of any team in the last 5 years. And it gets completely covered over because Patrick Mahomes is the greatest QB in NFL history. And Andy Reid now is closing in on being considered, one of the top 2 or 3 coaches in NFL history. My dream scenario would be the Rams deciding that they are okay with where they are, cutting Zach Evans, him being signed by the Chiefs, and becoming the overall running back 13, running back 14. So I guess my point would be here that you've convinced me that Zach Evans is a good pick, even if he's on the Rams. My scenario is, what if he's on the Kansas City Chiefs in the middle of the season? So I guess I'm leaning towards Zach Evans. It would be my first Zach Evans in a recent best ball, but it also feels like maybe the tournament winning play here.
Amen. We've talked. He's been talked about for a round and a half. We can't back off now. Yeah, I didn't want to miss out on Wan'Dale, but I was thinking that we could have went for him at that last pick, so to see him come back. I was kind of between Justice Hill and Evans at the Robinson selection, so I think that's worked out pretty well. Sean, I like the the fantasy writing that you're coming up with there in terms of getting him over to the Chiefs. That would be that'd be the first.
Just believe.
That's the first good decision the Chiefs will have made at running back in a couple of seasons. So maybe it happens.
Zach Evans was so good at both TCU and Ole Miss, and I mean his main problem has always seemed to be just being reliable. And you would love to think that he's maturing and will do that at the NFL level because he's an absolutely electric talent. And if he can unlock that talent, one of the things is he's a little bit lighter in terms of actual weight, actual weight than what he looks like out on the field. He didn't test quite as fast as, again, he looks. And so I think when you look at the weight speed combination in terms of tested, it doesn't flash in the same way that what happens when you watch him. And that's backed up by, he's always the image that pops up for Dave Cabin's breakaway rush score, because Zach Evans, not only was he a mega recruit coming out of high school, but then when he was on a college football field, he was a breakaway rush monster. And that's what you want. You want running backs who can give you big plays. There are lots of guys who can go out there and fall forward for 6 inches if you've got it blocked up. That's not the thing that you're necessarily looking for. So Zach Evans here in the 20th. It's one of these things where as soon as you draft a guy, you start to feel more optimistic. You're like, oh, I mean, obviously now he's going to do well, but it's exciting to have him on this team. I really enjoy this final pick.
No, I've loved this draft, and it's really rounded out into shape. You guys had full confidence the entire way through it. I may have had some concerns, and people may have enjoyed my, I'll say my displeasure at some of the selections, but it has been a huge amount of fun. Running through the team again, it is Tyreek Hill, Devontae Smith, T. Higgins, Jahan Dodson, Quentin Johnson, Rashad Bateman, Marvin Mims, and Wendell Robinson at receiver. Breece Hall, DeAndre Swift, Brian Robinson, Devin Achane, and Zach Evans at running back. Tight ends of Hunter Henry, Tyler Conklin, Trey McBride, Cade Otton, Mike Gesicki, and then we have Justin Fields and Sam Howell at quarterback. How are you feeling now that it is all said and done? Dave, happy with the team?
Yeah, I really like it. I like having an excuse to draft as many tight ends as are worth drafting this year.
Yeah, and I always love when Sean will tell us that, it's looking good over at the Road of His Tools for this team to help win us $200,000 this year. So everything comes together at the end. Sean, as we get ready to wrap up, any final thoughts, any final words?
Well, just wanted to really thank Dave Philippi for drafting with us. This was so cool. As I mentioned, we have the 2 main winners of the contest. I've pulled 3 additional names. Dave's was one of those. And I reached out to him just a couple of hours before we did this and said, look, we're trying to find some fun draft experiences. You know, are you interested? The fact that he was able to do it on short notice was really, really cool. And then to get here and draft a little bit of an unusual team, not unusual, but just a few little tweaks to some of the things
wrinkles
that we've been doing. I mean, I've had Justin Fields ranked really high and had him as a clear priority target in drafts. And yet, especially in the FFPC side, haven't selected him a ton. To draft him in the middle of 5 here and then to have everything kind of revolve around that in such a cool way has been exciting. And so it's always great to bring someone in, especially someone who is working on a great Dynasty article for us, as I mentioned, who finished in the top 100 of BBM3 last year, to inject a great best ball mind into this draft and to have you on the show, Dave. Really appreciate it. You did a great job and looking forward to more cool stuff in the future.
Thank you guys. Really a pleasure.
No problem. It's been awesome. And, you know, me and Sean, I mentioned at the end, I think it might have been last Friday's show, is like, you know, stay tuned. Me and Sean were bouncing about all these crazy ideas of what we might do and different ideas, but we were like, let's get somebody extra onto draft, and it's been awesome to have you on, Dave. So anything that you want to shout out? Are you on Twitter? What do you want to let the listeners know?
Well, hopefully they can look forward to reading something from me on RotoViz. So
stay tuned. Stay tuned.
That's what we're working on. Yeah, look forward to getting some good feedback from Sean and Blair and anybody else, and yeah, hopefully make a debut. That will be extremely exciting.
That'll be exciting. And then obviously you can come back on after the season's over to talk about how we drafted the winning team in this particular contest. So if you are interested in playing over at the FFPC, it is myffpc.com. This contest is a $125 entry fee, $200,000 top prize for it. But they have a multitude of other formats available, including Dynasty. So check them out. Love all the stuff they do over at the FFPC. My name is Colin Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at @OverToMarland. My co-host is Sean Siegel. Check out his work up on rotoviz.com. It is hard to believe we are, at this point, just hours away from the NFL season. It is it's crazy to believe that we got to this point. I want to thank Dave again for jumping on. But until we are back, have a good one.